Hi, I'm Hannah from the Lethbridge Transparency Council, and I'm here interviewing Davey Wiggers, a city council candidate. Welcome, Davey.
Hey, Hannah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So starting off, what do you think needs improvement in the processes of city council and administration?
Um, Interesting question. Concern that it's been expressed a lot lately relates to whether it is council or administration that's actually leading city initiatives. What that indicates is that there's a breakdown in communication between the city manager's office and council. If there's not clear communication, then administration has no choice but to make educated guesses. So I think what's needed is concise direction, transparent and unambiguous communication from a proactive council, not a reactive one.
Yeah, absolutely. That I was talking about that with the council earlier, that the difference between being proactive and reactive in government is really important and makes a big difference. So what recommendations would you make to engage more people in the municipal development plan and process?
Well, the MDP is kind of a large document. Um, the goal there is to look at all municipal concerns and try to make a plan for each one of those. But it reads kind of like an Encyclopedia Britannica. So if you need something to put yourself to sleep, the MDP is your document. Um, what in my view it should look like really is a story outline. And if you've ever written an essay in school, you know that you're supposed to start a story with an outline. So then the individual points in that outline should be put forth, guided wherever possible by the stakeholders it speaks to. In this case, years worth of effort went into developing this plan, but although an outline is mentioned, the plan of this scope should have been more limited. It isn't necessary to lay out necessarily to the detail that some of the headings were, and that would have prevented, I think, some members of council questioning the MDP on the back end. So when you have that plan in place going into it, then everybody knows what everything's about and it's clearly understood. And then it's easy to, like I said, engage the stakeholders and get people like, oh, I don't know. When you're talking governance, you know, the Lethbridge Transparency Council, or when you're talking sports, the Lethbridge Sports Council. There's so many things and so many community organizations whose job it is to focus on that one item. And I don't think they're being involved to the degree that they could be.
Yeah, I know certainly in a big document like the MDP, there's a lot of people that get impacted by that document that are involved. So
But very much. I've had many emails from different groups asking, relating to bylaw, what is it, 6265 or 3265? You know, what do you think about this? And then you have to go through all 279 pages to find that what they're talking about. So yeah, no, I get it.
yeah, for sure. So big question, what do you think the top 3 issues are in the community and how do you plan to address them?
Another interesting question, and I actually spoke to this in a blog on my website, which is daveywiggers.ca. First and foremost is, and I know all my fellow council candidates all have pretty much said the same thing. At first is community safety. And that has a few headings under that. So the police budget, having lost $1 million a year for 2 years, which people don't seem to mention very often. Now, as the chief mentioned, you know, through their rainy day fund and a few diverted already appropriated funds, you know, they manage this year's budget, but next year's is going to be an issue, and any years beyond that, they're starting to lose officers. So that's one thing. Although they need that restored, and then a program I'd like to see is community policing, where the community actually is engaged directly with officers for that segment of the community so that they build that relationship. I think as part of safety, a loitering bylaw, which is precedent in many other communities in Alberta as well, needs to be in place and enforced. I think the Watch is a great program. I think that could be enhanced with beat cops. And finally, I think one issue for the police is that you have constables doing administrative work rather than police work. So we need to get them back doing police work and have the budget necessarily to do the administration. Second item is transit. Now, the city has tried to improve it using the City Link program, but really, how's it going? I've heard some pretty awful feedback, if we're going to be honest. So are we engaging the citizens affected by the changes to see how they feel? Are we pivoting where we need to? And you can insert the Ross Gillett pivot GIF here. Next is ridership. The city already subsidizes ridership to the tune of some 80% of net budget. So incenting riders with student passes or passes for downtown employees so they don't need to park their cars downtown. General passes when you make wholesale changes to the transit plan, just as an incentive for people to try it out and then gather feedback. These things all make sense because polls never give you reliable data if the sample size is too small, which is what our ridership is. So lastly, and speaking of offering bus passes to downtown employees to save on parking, a pet peeve, and I think a real issue is downtown paid parking. I know only a couple of people who've tried to convince me that free parking at Park Place doesn't draw potential shoppers away from downtown shops. And I mean couple as in two. I know far more people who work downtown that believe otherwise. You combine personal safety concerns with the prospect of having to pay $1.80 for a 5-minute in and out of a store. Guess what? I'm going to the mall. Lastly, there are potential issues with making downtown parking free, but thanks to the roaming meter checkers that we have that cost us a fortune, we have the technology to restrict parking time and still issue tickets. So those are the three things that, from a municipal standpoint, things that the city can actually do something about. Those are my top three.
I appreciate the examples that you gave there of different ways to address them and solve them. So thank you. What would you want to do to create a good environment for business in Lethbridge?
A wonderful world of zoning. The province isn't the only one who needs to reduce red tape. We have enough to supply a ticker tape parade. My doctor recently expressed a concern that the development permit for his new building was delayed by months when a neighboring complementary business is already operational. And that had to do with parking and zoning, commercial stuff. But the question is why? Why did one get processed in normal time and one delayed by months? It made no sense. So next point, more zoning. We can't treat one commercial district one way, then have a completely different set of rules for another commercial district. And here I'm going to pick on the downtown again. Lethbridge downtown is zoned discretionary use. And that issue is far too complex to go into detail here. We don't have the time, but suffice it to say, if we want to create a vibrant downtown, forcing the business community there to stand in the way of, say, a halfway house is not the way to attract more business to the core. The business downtown wants to do business and make money. That's what businesses do. They don't need to be concerned with if a particular social program is located there as well. It just doesn't work. So it wouldn't jive if you tried to put a halfway house right next to Costco. It shouldn't jive it downtown either. Last thing I mentioned earlier, community policing, dedicated officers to at-risk communities, building those relationships, breaking down the barriers. A concerned business owner will feel much better when he can call his neighborhood police constable and say, "Hey, Dave, come by a minute. I need to talk with you. I got a security concern, I need your advice.
Yeah, we certainly don't have that same policing model here in Lethbridge. It would be very cool though if I was able to just call up a police officer and talk to them. That I think that'd be pretty cool. So appreciate that. So circling back to the MDP, in the most recent MDP process, what decisions did you agree with and what decisions did you disagree with?
This is gonna be, have you read the thing? There's a year's worth of light bedtime reading. Seriously though, overall, I think the city did a fantastic job putting it together. I know it took a long time, efforts by many people, many departments. I think I mentioned a couple things already. I think some headings are a little more detailed than they needed to be, and possibly caused the process to take longer than it otherwise could have. Other than that, a little overzealous in some, a little lackadaisical in others. Overall, I think it was a really great document, and there's not a whole lot I would change about it.
Absolutely. So you mentioned transit earlier. Talking about transportation as a whole, how would you prioritize transportation in the future for Lethbridge?
And you know what, again, here's where the city has done everything it should in generally acceptable priorities. They have it straight. I don't see the need to change something that's not broke. From I believe it's pedestrians, transit, and then no, pedestrians, bikes, transit, multimodal transportation, and then finally cars, I believe it was. Yep. So, you know, where cars are at the end of that, that's still really surprising with the effort that we put into streets and expressways and exits, etc., so on and so forth. So if that's already at the bottom of the list, I don't see any need to move that up. Do you?
Yeah. So looking at the last section, finances here. So where do you think the city should be spending more money?
Again, as mentioned earlier, police. If we invest in community policing, change the image, that perception of the public, of the LPS, real or perceived, back to that of dedicated peace officers sworn to serve and protect, that will help build that trust back in our Lethbridge Police Service, so they can do their job, create and boost those relationships with local business and the communities that, if, you know, for a downtown or for the warehouse district, or for the far south and far north, wherever, you know, the community policing programs are established, they can create those relationships with the public, help build that rapport, that comradeship, and you know, if I can talk to an officer, not just as a police officer, but as a neighbor, I have much more faith in them. If they, because they're only human, they screw up just like all of us will, you know, and they say, you know what, I screwed up, I'm sorry. It's taken at face value, not second guessed.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the other end, where do you think the city could reduce spending?
Well, first and foremost, there's a couple things that could change. The green bin program, although overall interesting, I think shelving it for the time being is a good start. It's a want, not a need. The third bridge. I'll listen to what citizens of this wonderful city have to say on the subject, because it is part of a referendum question on the ballot. But unless we find a way to fund the project in conjunction with other levels of government, and I've heard everything from 60 million to 300 million, your guess is as good as mine. But it's going to be a hard 10% hike in property taxes and a tough pill to swallow, because the province and federal government do not pay for municipal infrastructure. So unless we find a way to change the route, change the engineering somehow, or we have a sympathetic provincial or federal government that's willing to kick in the dough, to a 75-25 ratio, which is typical, 75 being other levels and 25 being municipal. I don't see that something that we're going to get done in short order. I do think that we need to find an answer, because it is something that citizens are asking for, but the way it currently is isn't the way. There has been mentions of safety concerns. I had a thought on that as far as exiting West Siders from the area, because technically, if you could think of the West Side as a really big cul-de-sac, the river bottom goes right around it, around Sunset Acres and Mountain Meadows. Now, speaking of Mountain Meadows, if you go down Walsh Drive all the way, it'll take you right into the river bottom. And if you cross the river there, you'll end up right intersecting with Highway 509 as standoff. Maybe talk to the Department of Indian Affairs, see if they're willing to kick in money for a bridge on the back end. It opens up a west side commercial district to citizens west of Lethbridge, helps people from the blood reserve cut time off when they're coming into town. I can think of so many benefits to that. And there you go. You have an exit and a way to potentially to finance it. Overall, I think the city needs to take a break in spending on large capital projects. And that is unless other levels of government are willing to step up, like they did, for example, with CASA. That was kind of a no-brainer. Only cost us $250,000, and is a feather in certainly in the cap of our arts community.
Yeah, so this dovetails really well into the next question, which is just what criteria do you recommend is looked at before approving these capital projects?
So that one's easy. For any and every project, the city should, the city should perform a cost-benefit analysis. What will it cost? What tangible or even consequential benefits will it bring? Again, CASA is a no-brainer. The province providing the lion's share of the cost there, we just, provided the land. Now, granted, on the land there was a bit of controversy, but time was limited as far as making a decision. And like I said, CASA being a coup for our arts community. That said, a restored Bowman Arts Center now sits vacant. How much money did we spend on that renovation, and what are the plans for the building, which besides being a slowly decaying asset doesn't generate any revenue? That's something I'm curious about.
Yeah, I think a lot of Lethbridge's citizens are as well. That's something that I've heard echoed for sure. And so when we look at, I know you talked about pausing capital just projects, I guess, without provincial and federal money. When you look at our capital plan that we have in Lethbridge, what expenses are you in favor of and what expenses are you less in favor of?
So first, project that I'm in favor of, obviously the agri-food hub at the X is already underway. I wholly support that continuation, but to to help bolster that project, the renovations being done at the Lethbridge Airport will provide an easy in and out for connector services for the people who attend the conventions that will be held at that hub, and are typically responsible for making, pardon the pun, but groundbreaking investment decisions. So that's the airport's number one. Number two in favor is fire station number 3. And that's just obvious. Primary mandate for any city council in the Municipal Governance Act is to administer police, fire, and ambulance services. It's time we stop looking at ourselves as a small rural town. We're no longer. We're the 3rd largest city in the province with the most stable economy in the province. It's time we stood up and took notice of that. So as far as council or not support, again, I'll reserve comment on the 3rd bridge beyond what I've already said as far as its routing, and so on and so forth. So again, that doesn't quite fit this bill, but the 2 that should be on indefinite hold should be the organic waste program and the Performing Arts Center. 2 projects I support in principle, but just not now, not with other funding sources.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Davey. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Is there anything you'd like to add or let people know how they can get in touch with you?
Well, and I've presence on pretty much every type of social media. Although I freely admit I haven't figured out how to post to TikTok yet. But my website is daveywiggers.ca. My email is daveyforcouncil@outlook.com. And my phone number is also easy to remember. It's 587-821 DAVV or Davey, and that's 3288. So 587-821-3288.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Davey. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, Hannah. Thank you very much for having me.